Every day, God sends us, His people, young, old, and everyone in between, out into His world, to the places we normally go, work and school, gym and shop, field and factory, to the people He's put us alongside, to do good work that brings good to others, ministering love and grace, snuffing out injustice, and speaking truth with kindness, sharing Jesus in word and deed, to see brows unfurrow, hearts soften, wounds heal, people set free. Home, school, work, a nation changed, day by day.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. It's really, really good to be with you for all sorts of reasons. I didn't know the Pete Chilvers connection. That's great for those of you who have that connection. I didn't know that it was Donut Sunday.
Only one.
One between all of us. Okay. Oh, well, we better start praying about that then. And thank you for your prayers too. I love the prayers about blowing the winds of revival to our nation. Part of my history, just so you know me a little bit, is that my dad was from Sri Lanka. My mum was white British, my dad was from Sri Lanka. They met in Britain. But my dad and pretty much all of his village became Christians during a time of revival in Sri Lanka. Somebody from the Welsh revival came to the shores of Colombo. Somebody from Colombo came to the north of Sri Lanka, conveyed the message of Jesus. My grandfather converted from Hinduism at that point, and pretty much the whole of his village did too. And at the point of my grandfather's baptism, they changed his surname from a very Hindu surname to a name that they pretty much chose randomly out of the Bible. And I think I came off relatively well there, given some of the options that are available to choose the name Benjamin. I'm okay with that. People think it's a first name. That's okay. And they get Ken and Ben confused. That's okay. People in my church used to call me Ken Ben. I'm fine with that. They're being very kind there because my middle name is in fact Leonard. So I really am Ken Len Ben, which was a deliberate joke by my dad, who thought, wouldn't it be fun if all of his names rhymed? And of course I wasn't old enough or even born at the time of choosing it to say, no, that wouldn't be fun at all. But one of the few advantages of it is I think it's generally said in a friendly way, Ken Len Ben. You know, try and say it aggressively, I don't think it works. And also, if you want to follow what I'm doing with Whole Life Discipleship on any social media, shockingly, nobody else seems to be called Ken Len Ben. And so at Ken Len Ben on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, you can find me there. Now, we have this beautiful theme today to look at the mission theme, world mission, and see how that applies to our world, your world, wherever you find yourself. So let's look at some Bible verses that help us to do that. I'm going to pick 3 verses that all say similar things. I'm reading from the NIV. Colossians 3 and verse 17. And whatever you do, think about that for us just a second. Whatever you do, whether in word or deed, do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God through him. And then a few verses later on in Colossians, it's still in chapter 3, it says, whatever you do still, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for human masters. And then a similar verse in Ephesians 6 and verse 7 says, still really applying to whatever it is that we're doing, serve wholeheartedly as if you were serving the Lord, not people. So this applies to all of us here. It applies to any of you joining us online on Zoom. Welcome. Great to have you joining us. Sorry if the video clip didn't work. We can put a link to the video clip so that you can find that too. It's a short clip and it's available on YouTube. Don't look for it now. We'll send you the clip a little bit later on. What you've got there is 3 verses in just 2 chapters in the Bible, but they're right at the heart of what you've asked me to think about today. And it's right at the heart of the organisation that I'm part of. This idea that we are all called to be ministers. We're all called to be representing Jesus wherever we find ourselves. And that mission is everywhere. So normally on World Mission Sunday, you would invite some person from somewhere else on the globe who's involved in mission work or who represents that work. Great thing to do, vital thing to do. My faith has come from that route, as you've heard, from Sri Lanka. And then you would support them and pray for them. This Sunday we're saying, hold on, if we're thinking about world mission, that applies to you. That applies to me. That applies to all of us, wherever we will find ourselves throughout this week. Now that's right, obviously, it sounds right, but it also sounds a bit scary, doesn't it? How does that apply to us and what's expected of us? Well, the organisation that I'm part of often represent it this way with some dots. There are 100 dots on this screen here, and the red dots represent Christians in the UK. Now that's roughly the right number of Christians who would identify themselves as Christians and who would attend church at least once a month, in person or online. And the grey dots is everybody else. And we can have this view of church that we are the red dots, we gather together and we have some influence over the grey dots. We invite them to join us for our events, all good things to do. And so it's the grey dots nearest us that we have some effect over. But if that's all we do, we're in trouble. And thankfully, that's not all we do. For the majority of our time, it looks much more like this. The same number of red dots, but we are out and about, like that first video showed, in work and in leisure, with family who are not yet sharing our faith, with neighbours, in our social interests and so on. And the number of grey dots that we connect with is massively more in those contexts. So what would it be like if when we gather together, it's about equipping and resourcing for when we're apart? That's surely what this Sunday is about as we think about World Mission Sunday. And so what does that look like in these verses? Well, Colossians 3 verse 17, and whatever you do, whether in word or deed, do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God through him. That whatever you do there, that is thinking about wherever you find yourself. The context in Colossians isn't necessarily a job somebody wants to do. Now, it could be paid or unpaid work, it doesn't matter. But wherever you find yourself in the week, if you're in a context that you love, then you're hugely blessed. But this isn't necessarily that. It applies to slaves in this context. And we would view slavery now as something that in the end the Bible views as untenable. And so Wilberforce and others help trailblaze ending slavery, although we're still in the fight to end slavery globally. Nevertheless, to the extent that it exists and the slaves are still there, they're called to do their whatever they do, wherever they find themselves, working with all their soul, actually it says, as working for the Lord, not for human masters. And that Ephesians verse, Ephesians 6 verse 7, serve wholeheartedly, that means more than just do a good job. It means to picture the people that you're serving and to serve with goodwill to them this week in paid or unpaid work, wherever you find yourself. So what does that look like? Well, one way that in LICC we often help people to picture this is by using the term frontline. It looks like wherever you will be on your front line. Now, the term frontline has all sorts of associations. It's been used a lot during the COVID period to mean frontline workers, and that's vital. and helpful. It has military connotations. I don't mean that necessarily. Some of you will be thinking Frontline is the name for the #1 flea treatment for cats and dogs in the UK. I don't mean that either. Some of you weren't thinking that, and now you are thinking that, and I apologise for that. But Frontline simply means, where in your week do you spend most time, particularly time with people who aren't Christians? And we all need places like that. And for many of you, that will be paid work. For some of you, it will be family. For some of you, it will be neighbours or shops or leisure pursuits and so on. Where is your front line? And that's a place to think about in terms of world mission. So let me give you some examples. There's a guy I spoke to just 2 weeks ago who spent a lot of his working life in the Air Force. And the thing is, he didn't want to be in the Air Force. He actually thought that God was calling him to be like an ordained minister. And so he regretted this time for many, many years. And then he felt God say this to him. His name was Claude. He felt God say, I planted you here to touch people's lives. I planted you here to touch people's lives. And that dramatically transformed his work in the Air Force. There's a woman Sue and I know called Mo in her 80s who has had many tragedies in her life. She's seen all 3 of her sons die of different forms of cancer. And then her husband was critically ill. And we were talking in our church about this term Frontline, and she was caring for her husband who had some sort of faith. Actually, he came to faith. I had the privilege of praying with him in hospital. And she was thinking, so where is my front line? And she decided that her front line was the carers coming in to support her husband in her home. And when I visited Mo in her home and her husband, there was no doubt to me that those carers loved Mo. You know, they stayed longer than they had to. They said yes to the cup of tea. There was something about being with her that they loved because she ministered grace and love to them, even while they were doing the most intimate and personal of care to her husband. There's a younger guy who works for Nando's, in one of the Nando's in London. Now, he's a Christian, but he's pretty much the only Christian as far as he knows in this Nando's in central London. And one of the other, he's older among some fairly younger staff, and one of the younger guys, he started talking inappropriately about a woman on their staff team. And this is not far from where some fairly major things have happened to women in central London. And my friend who's a Christian, or friend's friend, in a church in central London, he decided that as a Christian he couldn't accept that. So he takes the guy to one side and as gently as he can, he says, look mate, that's just not on. That's not what we do here. We don't talk about each other that way, and we don't talk about women that way. Now he's doing that because he's a believer. And he's doing it because as a believer in his workplace, it's his role to speak about truth and justice. It's his role to mould culture. Now the thing with those examples is they aren't necessarily just telling people about Jesus when we think about our world mission roles. It absolutely includes being willing and able and even wanting the opportunity to convey the message of hope that we have in Jesus. But in a typical frontline, that won't be all that we do, and that message is watered down if it's all that we do. In a typical frontline, it's about our whole lives and about being people who convey the message of hope in a whole variety of ways. We have a little video series, they're only 90 seconds, that convey this called Fruitfulness on the Frontline. I'm going to play one for you now. I hope it works online, but it is only 90 seconds, and the words are on the screen as well, if it doesn't. And if not, we'll send you a link to it.
Father, help me do good today.
I want to shape this place to your design.
Help me see the value my work has to you.
May I model your kindness and patience.
So that you are recognised.
May they know Jesus through my presence.
May they see your light as I share mine.
Give me your joy and self-control.
So that your warmth touches those I meet.
Help me to be generous.
Quick to put others first.
Sharing clearly your love and grace.
Give me words to speak about you.
And courage to stand for justice and truth.
Whatever the day brings,
In my humanity, weakness, break through.
Let my life overflow with you.
And there's that verse again from Colossians. I don't know if any of those examples fit for you, but they're just trying to convey the different sorts of front lines that you've got. You've got an office worker, you've got a plumber, you've got a sports coach, you've got a granny looking after the kids. Any of those places could be front lines, couldn't they? So if it's more than just explaining about Jesus, what can it look like on this Mission Sunday, World Mission Sunday, if it's for all of us? Well, it could look like any of these 6 M's. In fact, could look like all of these 6 M's. It could look like modelling godly character in the place where you work, like my friend in Nando's. It could look like making good work, where you do good work, not because of who sees it, but as the verses say, as working for the Lord. It could look like that for you, doing it as well as you can, knowing he's the person that you're serving. It could look like ministering grace and love, like our friend Mo, who does that when the carers came in to serve her. It could look like moulding the culture of the place. Again, the Nando example would be moulding the culture of the place for better. And it could look like speaking up for truth, even before we necessarily speak up about Jesus, or in addition to, speaking truth and justice into a context. And it can look like being a messenger for the gospel. It is all of those things, not necessarily just one of them. So if I pause the screen just for a second, and you imagine a piece of work that you're doing on your front line. And again, please don't necessarily narrow this down to paid employment. Anything can be work in that sense if we give it to God. It could be doing the washing up, doing the cleaning, something you volunteer in. You're doing a piece of work, and it counts as a front line because you're spending time with people who don't yet share your faith. Where do you picture our God in this scenario? Where do you picture Jesus in the work? Imagine there are three elements. It's not always as simple as this, but imagine there are. There is the person that you serve, who is your boss, who is your line manager, who's in charge. That's one element. There is you doing the work and the work itself that you're carrying out, and there is the person who receives the work, who you're doing it for. It's not always as simple as that. Sometimes they overlap a bit. Sometimes 3 and 1 overlap, for example. So I'm doing a piece of work here today. It might not look like it, and it's a joy to do it. But I'm serving, your elders and Simon, who's asked me to do it. So in a way, they're my boss today, but they're also receiving some of what I'm doing. So it's not always as simple as that. But there are those 3 things. My question to you is, do you picture Jesus in that story of those 3 elements? And if so, where do you picture them? And what do these verses have to say about it? Let's have a look again then at Colossians 3 and verse 23. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not human masters. As working for the Lord, not human masters. Some of you used the New Living Translation, as though you were working for the Lord rather than people. So we picture him there as our boss, as the one who's in charge. And we serve because we're serving him regardless of whether our boss is good or bad. I have a good boss today, but whether or not I don't, I do it as working for him, you understand. And then Ephesians 6 and verse 7 says, serve wholeheartedly as if you were serving the Lord, not people. Remember, with goodwill to the person that you're serving. So it's as though the service that you do as unto the Lord, as if you were serving the Lord, many translations say. So I picture him there as the one I'm doing the work for, the one I'm caring for. If I work in a hospital, the patients that come in, I do it as to the Lord there in that verse. And then what does Colossians 3 and verse 17 add to that picture? And whatever you do, any of you, whether in word or deed, do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him, in his name, as though it was him in your shoes doing this work. Are you with me? So, in a sense, you have all three are true. It's not one or the other. All three aspects of picturing our Lord are true in any piece of work. My question really is, which of those today helps you to picture this most clearly and most vividly? Chris Wright, the theologian, has thought this through a bit with the two different Colossians verses, and he sees all of those aspects in that. So whatever you do in the name of the Lord is as if it were Christ doing the work. What would I do for people if I were Christ? And the other verse is, what would I do for people if they were Christ? As my boss or as the person I'm serving. Now, for me, it might be different ones of those might help you to picture this mission cause that we're all signing up to this Sunday more powerfully. If it's him I'm doing it for, then I know he will be a good boss. I know he will be understanding. I know he'll be forgiving of my mistakes and encouraging. I know he will receive my best. He will receive my best and make it better. I want to work for him, to work for excellence and a good standard. If it's in his name, then I'm his ambassador, as Paul also says. I represent him. And if I'm doing it to others as though to him, then it's like Mother Teresa used to say, where she tries to picture Jesus in everybody she cares for and sees something of Jesus in those people. It could be that different elements of that speak more loudly and clearly to you today than one of the other two elements. If so, stay with that. Stay with that. So let me give you a couple of examples. It could be that the element of as though whatever you do, as though you were serving the Lord, not human masters, is the thing that strikes you, particularly maybe one or two of you who don't want to be where you are in your front line. It's not where you particularly want to be. And you can pray about that and God may well lead you to somewhere else. But for tomorrow, you are where you are. And God can use you there. I don't know if any of you caught any of the marathon before you got out today on the news. None of you are admitting that, so you're all much more spiritual than me. But I remember the BBC marathon coverage, London Marathon coverage. It always has that same tune, you know, in the background. Da, 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 da. Nothing like that. But anyway, there's a tune that happens, and every time I hear it once a year, I associate it with the London Marathon. And I was thinking about the Bristol Half Marathon 3 weeks ago. I don't know if you saw this on the news, but a guy called, I'm going to have to look his name up, Omar Ahmed, he won the half marathon by mistake and was disqualified because he'd entered the 10K and he missed his turning, and so he realises then he's in the half marathon, and he says he's an elite runner anyway, and so he carries on the half marathon and he wins even though he'd entered the 10K. And then they disqualify him because he's an elite runner, and the other runners say, well, if we'd known he was in the half marathon, we'd have chased him, which to me feels a bit harsh. But I'm interested in this because this isn't the first time this has happened, and it's happening around the world at least a couple of times in marathons. Once there was a guy doing the half marathon, he missed his turning, and he'd never run a marathon before, and he said, well, I'm already here, I'm already tired, I might as well keep going, and he ran the marathon for the first time. They almost didn't give him a medal, but the other people said, no, he should get a medal. And before that, there was a woman, this is why I'm looking it up, called Georgine Johnson. She was 42, and she entered the 10K and missed her turning and realised she was in the marathon. So she's never run a marathon before. She asked the police if they can take her back to the start. They say, no, there's just too many crowds. We cannot take you back. I'm really sorry about that. And so she begins to cry, and then she realises, well, I might as well just go for this. And she said this. She did complete the marathon. This isn't the race I trained for. This isn't the race I entered. But for better or worse, this is the race I'm in. And she completed the marathon in 4 hours, 4 minutes, by the way, which is both impressive and a little bit annoying as well, isn't it? But it could be that you need to hold on to that. You are where you are. This is the race you're in, and God can use you there. It could also be that you need to find more front lines. For some of you, it may be that you just need to picture that you do represent Jesus there, where you are. There was a woman called Maggie, and she was discussing her faith with some people. She wasn't yet a Christian. She was discussing her faith with some Christians, and she kept asking difficult questions. They kept giving their best answer, but in the end, it wasn't their answers that convinced her. It was them. She wrote them this poem at one point, before she was a Christian. She said this: do you understand that you represent Jesus to me? Do you understand that when you treat me with gentleness, it raises the question in my mind that maybe he is gentle too. Maybe he isn't someone who laughs at me when I'm hurt. Do you understand that when you listen to my questions and you don't laugh, I think, what if Jesus is interested in me too? Do you understand that when I hear you talk honestly about your arguments and conflicts and scars from your past, I think maybe I'm just a regular person instead of a no-good little girl who deserves abuse. If you care, I think maybe he cares. And then there's this flame of hope that burns inside of me, and for a while I'm afraid to breathe because it might go out. Do you understand that your words are his words, your face his face to someone like me? Please be who you say you are. Please, God, don't let this be another trick. Please let this be real. Please. Do you understand that you represent Jesus to me? Well, that deeply moved these people who were trying to explain Jesus and answer her questions. And so they got back on the phone as soon as they got this from her and said, this is so powerful. Do you mind if we use it? And she said, of course I don't mind if you use it, but you need to know something. You need to know that since I've written that, I'm in. I've decided this Christianity thing is for me. And they said what I would say in those circumstances. The Christians then said, so which of our arguments was it that convinced you, finally, to turn to faith? And she said, it wasn't any of your arguments. It was that I found enough in you to point me to Jesus. Could that be true for us? So, as we close, we are going to ask you if there's a way that we could all sign up for this kind of mission journey. And Tom's going to come and intro that, and I'll have the privilege of praying. But could it be that the line manager image, that we do it as though we're serving him, is the image that we need to take into our week? That we do it with excellence, knowing he will take our best and make it better. And he'll forgive our mistakes too. Could it be that in his name image is the image like Maggie, where we represent Jesus, is the image we take into our week? Could it be the Mother Teresa image, that we're picturing Jesus in the people that we're serving, is the image that we take into our week. It can be all of them, but it could be that just one of them jumps out at you. My question is, on this Mission Sunday for all of us, which of these images speaks most powerfully to your front line tomorrow?
Every day, God sends us, His people, young, old, and everyone in between, out into His world, to the places we normally go, work and school, gym and shop, field and factory, to the people He's put us alongside, to do good work that brings good to others, ministering love and grace, snuffing out injustice, and speaking truth with kindness, sharing Jesus in word and deed, to see brows unfurrow, hearts soften, wounds heal, people set free. Home, school, work, a nation changed. Day by day.